This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hey, and welcome to today's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your host, Michaela Anne, and this is the second year of our podcast. We're so happy to still be here and thankful you're here with us listening.
Yeah, because without you guys here, we wouldn't have a show. So thank you for returning. Thank you for taking a chance on us if it's your first time. We have a couple asks of you as our audience to keep this show moving down the road. The quickest and easiest would be to please subscribe or follow on your listening or viewing platform of choice. The second thing, there are two ways to financially continue to produce a show like ours. One is to sell ads and one is to reach out to your community. We don't want to interrupt our conversations and try to sell you a Casper mattress or some kind of sports green beverage. So with that, we've started a Patreon community. And over there, you get advance notice of our guests so you can have your questions answered directly. There is a community of other creatives so we can help go deeper into what we talk about on these shows. There is the opportunity to work with Michaela and I one-on-one in a either songwriting or production capacity to learn more about doing that for yourself. And then there's just the general goodwill of supporting this show for the cost of about a coffee a month. So if you're interested in that, there's a link below in the show notes.
And one of the things we really pride ourselves on this podcast that we think sets us apart is that we're not music journalists. We are working musicians ourselves. And instead of approaching this like interviews, we think of them as conversations that we're having with friends and people we admire. We're sitting around the table talking about the honest realities of what it is to build a lifelong career around your art.
Yeah, and like it or not, one of those realities is that most of this is completely out of our control. And so we like to focus this conversation on what is within our control. So usually it ends up being our mindsets, our habits, and we've boiled that all down to the underlying question, what do you do to create sustainability in your life so that you can sustain your creativity? And today we got to ask that question of the multifaceted Rhett Miller.
Rhett Miller is such an impressive person to me. He is a singer-songwriter, the lead singer of Old 97s, but he has diversified in so many ways. He has a podcast, he has a Substack, he's a published author of children's books of nonfiction, he's an advocate for mental health, for cystic fibrosis. He has toured or collaborated or worked with people like Jon Brion, the Decemberists, Rosanne Cash, Tori Amos. He has had a long and continually evolving career in the arts.
He also has his own podcast called Wheels Off, which is amazing. Michaela has been a guest on that, a little plug. But with that, we just dive right in, and there's not a lot of fat in this episode. It's a really great conversation. We don't necessarily touch so much on how he fills his other 22 hours, despite having such a varied list of things that he does. But with that, he said that that varied list, there's some fear that it inspired him to diversify so much. And that's just evidence of how open Rhett was and the vulnerability that he brought to this conversation and the wisdom and the experience and the humor and all of that. So we're not going to keep you from that. Without further ado, here is our conversation with Rhett Miller.
How long have you had your podcast?
I'm going to be hitting episode 200 any minute now.
Okay.
I started it probably in 19. God, I can't believe it's been 5 years.
Whoa. What's your pace?
It was weekly, and then it pretty quickly, I realized every 2 weeks was enough.
We're at weekly still, but we take 2 months off.
Smart.
Yeah.
We start in March.
We decided to do like a season thing.
Yeah. It seems like it's going really well. People really love it. It seems like it's a good job, you guys. Bravo.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it kind of started quickly. Had the idea around Christmas time in 2022. And then given that we're talking to musicians about like how to make this whole thing sustainable, was like, well, when do we launch it? And I was like, well, might as well launch it around South by. I mean, that's like everybody seems to start traveling more in the middle of March. So like, let's start then. And then we had the even crazier idea of starting with 5 episodes and not just one. And then the goal was just to see it through weekly until the end of the year. And here we are in the second year. And it's, it's still kicking.
Congrats.
Yeah, we haven't figured out yet how to make money off of it.
Dude, same. I think I've made $100 in 5 years.
And people like probably think we're crazy. We're just like, we're going to do it until it feels like a burden, because even on days when we're just like, oh man, we're tired and we need a break or whatever, after the conversation ends, like every single time we're like, that was so great.
Yeah.
And we feel like nourished, and we have a young child. And so we're not out all the time and such a wonderful way to connect and connect in the way that we want to, of not just like small talk at the bar and reciting our tour schedules and like really talking about real stuff, which not everybody's comfortable with, but if you're on the podcast, you're expected to.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm assuming you're at your home studio in the Hudson Valley.
It's really a home office,
Okay.
though I do record stuff in here. I'm not great. I've got Logic, and I keep telling myself I'm going to learn how to master it or even really use it. But I've used it enough when I get asked to write for, stuff for movies. I can give them demos that are better than iPhone demos, but they're not great. It's nothing releasable coming out of this room. Y'all's room looks incredible.
Oh, thanks. Here, I'll give you a little look around. I mean, it's
Mike's on the drums, nice organ.
got a couple ISO booths too. So
Dude.
my our house is 40 feet that way, and my studio was in the basement. And then Michaela got pregnant with our daughter, and drums are my first instrument. I was like, this is not gonna work.
So Aaron's dad's a contractor, and luckily he was willing to come down, and they built the studio from the ground up on their own.
Brilliant.
So,
That's great.
yeah, it's been a quality of life increase. We're in a residential neighborhood in Nashville and dream of getting to move someplace with more land. But for now, we're like, this is very helpful.
Actually, constantly looking at the Hudson Valley, like,
Yeah.
ooh, what about there? Ooh, what about there? And
I could not recommend it more highly. And we've now got our youngest is graduating high school, but both of our kids went to the New Paltz High School, and they're good people, I think. I know they are. Although they constantly roast me. They can't stop roasting me.
Amazing. Yeah, we lived in the city for 11 years or so and miss it.
Yeah.
We don't miss the grind of living in the city, which is why we keep looking at that. And we have so many friends, up around you and northward and on the other side of the river and all. So.
We kept imagining living in the city with a little kid and like having to have one of those razor scooters and just all this stuff. Folks that'll let their kids go at such a young age on the subway by themselves, which is great, giving kids agency and freedom and responsibility. It seemed like it was going to be a lot. We have 3 acres.
Amazing.
But our kids were so glad when they got their licenses. And we were all so glad when they didn't depend on us for all that, because they both did lots of sports and they have lots of friends. And it's been great. And I'm gone a lot. I'm actually now excited to get back into the city more. My daughter's going to be attending Parsons. What, did you go there?
That's where we both went there.
did. So
It's amazing.
yeah, it's a really cool place. When we were there, we went to the jazz school. So the jazz school was separate from Mannes, which was like the classical conservatory. And my understanding is that they've now...
College of Performing Arts.
Yeah, which is so smart. I went to a boarding school, like an art school, for the last couple of years of high school. And at that point, there was music and theater and dance and creative writing and visual art. And having all of that mixed together was so inspiring and just like energizing. Then going to the new school, and like the jazz school was where the performing arts school is now, on 13th Street. And Mannes was like in the 80s on the Upper West Side. And it was just like, there was no crossover anywhere. And it made no sense to me.
It was pretty, it felt very like so focused on one thing, which is great for some people. But I ended up adding, the new school had this great program where you could go to school for 5 years and get a BA and a BFA. And I did that because I started to feel like I hated music. And so I added a BA and went to Eugene Lang and studied sociology and American history. And that expanded everything for me, which is a great segue because I wanted to talk about, we talk about diversifying a lot on this podcast as we talk to people about evolving through this career, whether it's out of necessity or just pure interest. And you kind of have my like dream life of like being a published author and nonfiction essays and your children's books, which we have, and teaching at a university eventually and hosting workshops. Can you talk about your evolution with that and what that's been like and how intentional was that, or if it's just kind of been as it's come?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, be careful what you wish for, because this dream life it's built on hustle. It's built on fear in a lot of ways. Our son has been at University of Vermont for a couple of years now, and he also was able to get some good assistance from them, but it's just the university system in the United States is broken, as is the healthcare system. In my family, we're, bearing the brunt of both of those things. As self-employed, my wife is an independent contractor. She did other stuff, but now she works with her brother at his company, which sells solar in the Hudson Valley. So she's a solar salesperson. So she's on the right side of history and she's doing something good. But it's still sales, and you're living and dying by the whims of these customers. Ugh. So in our job, it's a similar thing. where you never exactly know what it's going to be. And fortunately, I've got booking agents where I can look ahead and say, okay, well, this month I'm going to earn this much at least, and, spin it out through the year and just make sure that you can at least cover the basics. The basics get bigger now that we have 2 kids in the fall in college, and I don't want to go into massive debt. I don't want them to go into massive debt. I just kept trying to think of what else can I do. So I don't know if you can hear, but I've been struggling with my voice lately. In fact, yesterday I was at an incredible laryngologist who stuck a camera through my nostril into my throat and filmed me humming and talking and doing all the things, and figured out that I've got and this is also, you're getting all these exclusives. I did text my band this last night. I've got a cyst on one vocal cord and a node on the other. And there's 80% chance that I'll be able to deal with those through rehab and exercises. But, there's a 20% chance I'll have to get surgery that'll shut me down for a couple of months at least. And that's terrifying. So I just don't like the idea of all my eggs being in the basket of standing on stage screaming night after night, which I do 150, 200 plus nights a year. And the old 97s play big shows, which is great, but I make less money than I do playing smaller solo shows because of the overhead difference. So whenever the old 97s aren't on a 3-week-long tour, I'm doing weekends driving myself, which is in itself is so exhausting. You drive 6 to 10 hours and then load in, do a sound check, load in the merch, play the gig, go out to the merch table, sign for an hour, pose for pictures, talk, which is even harder on the voice, then load everything out, check into the hotel, wake up early, do it again. Y'all know it's a lot. And so the idea of having something else to supplement that, or maybe eventually kind of replace that, appealed to me. When my kids were younger, I thought maybe writing children's books. I've discovered that writing kids' books is only in the very rarest of cases a way to get rich. And I've been very lucky. I got a great publisher. Little Brown publishes my books. I got a great illustrator, Dan Santat, who had already won the Caldecott when we started working together. And since then, he's won the National Book Award, and he's up for some other crazy award right now. And so Dan is at the top of his field, and he's made a good career out of doing that, but he should. I mean, he's like one of the best people in the world at doing what he does. And I don't feel like music has that anymore, maybe. You can be one of the best people in the world at music, and I know people that I consider some of the best people in the world at it, and you can still be just living so month to month and terrified. I've always hustled, and I continue to do so. The jobs that you don't know about, in addition to the kids' books and the teaching that I've done and the songwriting retreats and seminars, the podcast, which isn't really a money-making venture. I've also been working for a few years with a couple of other writers on trying to create television content, which again is such a long shot. It's a shot that if it lands, it would be really great. And projects I've been working on are only ones that I'm drawn to, that I think I bring something to the table. And if one of those were to land, that would be great. It's like with every record you put out. I don't know if you guys have this feeling, but with every record, part of you thinks, maybe this is going to be the record. Maybe this will be the one where some song lands on a soundtrack, or maybe it's the song that connects. Nowadays, maybe somehow it gets picked up on TikTok, even though I don't even have the app on my phone. Maybe someone will. Yeah. My kids do like to tell me there's an old song of mine from a 20-year-old album, The Instigator. They're like, oh, Dad, one of your songs is on TikTok. It's a song called This Is What I Do. And the song's like, this is what I do. And they're like, yeah, so there'll be like some plumber with plumber's crack under a sink. And he's like teaching you how to fix the sink. And then your song, This Is What I Do, is playing. That's something.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
A little tangent on that. I learned recently that the way TikTok pays, I'll put that in air quotes, is not based on the number of views. It's based on the number of videos. If your song is in one video that gets 8 million views, you only get paid for one placement. Wow. But if your song is in 8 million videos that get one view each, you get paid way more money. So the whole infrastructure there is based on going viral.
Yeah.
It's so wild.
So now do I need to download TikTok and start making 8 million videos of...
But be careful, because we have a lot of friends, and I'm sure you do as well, here in town that have been signed to Rounder Records, and all of that through Concord and all that is administered, tied to Universal. And so when Universal and TikTok got in a fight, and Universal pulled all their music off of TikTok, all of a sudden all of our friends that were begrudgingly got on TikTok were like, fine, this isn't us, but we'll do it. all of a sudden they had all of these videos on there that were just completely silent because Universal pulled all the music.
I think they actually just came to a deal I saw. But it's interesting to note that it's like how fragile the ways in which we can get our music out into the world, how fragile they all are. So you're just like, I want to make music. Oh, but now I have to get everything on MySpace. Oh, that's done. Now I have to get everything on, oh, no, tell people don't listen on Spotify, buy the records. Now I need to get placements on playlists on Spotify and to ask everyone to stream. Oh, now I need to be on Instagram. Okay, no, it's like your head is spinning from how many new things and platforms you have to learn and put your energy and time into before it goes away. Like I'm not on TikTok and I'm always like, maybe I'll get on TikTok. And then I keep seeing these things in the news about like the government's going to ban it. And I'm like, do I want to get on TikTok? So at the same time, what you were just talking about, the perpetual irrational hope that you have to keep going and think, maybe this record, things will change. And in reality, maybe it's just going to be a little bit of a bump. But like with each new record that you put out, even if it isn't a big splash, it opens the door to new experiences, potentially new revenue sources. And that, I think, I'm in a bit of a place where I'm a little unfortunate to say, but I'm fully jaded on the music industry. I think the music industry is trash, to be honest, and full of really toxic people. I used to think like, oh, if you work hard enough and you just keep going and don't give up, it will work out. And now I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate how outspoken you've been about that. I feel like it's really valuable for people to say it, even though maybe for you at times you feel like, oh, God, you're putting yourself out there, opening yourself up to whatever negative feedback you might, certainly because of the world, do get. But it's really brave and it's really useful. And I'm glad you do it. It's true.
Thank you.
It's freaking tough out there, especially for young kids. I mean, I'm 53 years old. And so I've watched, from my earliest childhood, I've watched 8-track cassettes. And I remember, oh my God, cassettes are so cool. You know, all of the different media. And then the CD boom was, you know, what gave the old 97s our brief run on Elektra Records, because that whole business model in the 90s, the late 80s into the early aughts, was built around people rebuilding their catalogs, buying the CDs of the White Album or whatever that they had once owned on 8-track or something. And so all that dumb money in the 90s gave the 97s 3 studio albums from Elektra and me, 1 solo album, which is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of marketing. Even though we never had a hit, to this day, a big part of our audience was created by that push that we got via the old model, which admittedly was flawed and broken and stupid and deserved to die. But what came in its wake was sort of this new world of God only knows what this is. I don't know. It's easier to make music. It's harder to get music in people's ears. And music is so devalued. I always think about when you bring up the idea of hoping for this moment. I always think about the Nick Lowe mailbox, which was Nick Lowe in his bathrobe going out to his mailbox, not realizing that his song, Peace, Love, and Understanding, had been covered on the Bodyguard soundtrack, which had just become the biggest selling soundtrack in history. And he goes out to his mailbox and there's a check from his publisher for $1 million. Had no idea it was coming. He's just there in his socks and his slippers and his bathrobe. And he opens it and sees $1 million check. And I just feel like, did I have to hear that story? Because now I know that's on the table.
I want to add to my jadedness of like, I still am in this business because I love music. I saw Nico Case on Kayamo do like a In the Round with Mary Gauthier and Patty Griffin.
Wow.
And they were kind of talking about this stuff. And Nico Case was like, listen, I love music. I hate the music business. For me, speaking out about things, having these types of conversations, sharing like, oh, someone looks at Rhett Miller and is like, holy shit, he's so successful. And then hearing all of the work that you're doing behind the scenes to make sure that you are living a good life and providing for your family and also valuing your family. I think it's really important. And at the risk of sounding super cheesy, whenever I think about why are you still in the music business if it's so difficult, or if you think there's things that need to change and you can't stop talking about it, even though people don't want you to? Or why do you have kids if it's so hard in America? And you're constantly talking about how terrible policies are for families in America. And the risk of sounding cheesy is it's love.
Yeah.
It's totally love. People have families, no matter how hard it is, because they want that experience of love. People keep playing music, no matter how hard it is, because they love the experience of playing music. So I feel like it just helps all of us. It helps me learning about your journey and helps me like stay grounded in that and say, okay, maybe this isn't going to look like the way I dreamed, but if I do stay in it and do it the way that I want to, I might be able to find like really great pockets and things that I really can hold on to that love of all of this.
Yeah.
Which can be hard sometimes.
100%. I mean, there's a nobility in it. Not saying that I'm a hero. If you guys want to say that, sure, that's fine. No, I do think, because it's easy to feel like what we do is inherently selfish or narcissistic. Or I remember I dated a girl once she would tell me those things all the time. And they landed with me in a way that was unhealthy because the negative voices in my head were like, yep, see, told you. But I do think there's something that's really fundamental to our humanity. We need music. I remember David Bowie, who I always really loved. Bowie had an interview in Rolling Stone. I remember standing in an airport in like 2001, reading a Rolling Stone, a quick hit with Bowie. And they were asking him about the looming digital revolution. And it was the era of Napster. People were seeing the writing on the wall, that it was all going to fall apart. And Bowie was really clear about it. He said, oh yeah, this is all ending. So he said that brass ring that everybody was reaching for is going to be gone very soon. There will be no more lottery aspect. I'm putting words in his mouth, but this was the essence of it. There'll be no more lottery aspect to the music industry. And so what will be left will be the people who can't help but do it, who have no choice but do it because it's the only thing they know and it's what they love. And at the time, I felt like that was such a desolate take. But now I kind of look back on it and think, well, first of all, he was right and prescient. But also, there's something really beautiful about that. I think that we all are coming to it with good intentions. Not all. I think there's still grossness, of course, but
yeah, I think that is really, there's so much hope in there and some beauty and some like returning to the idea of the musician and following a calling. It plays into this thing when we have had these conversations with octogenarians or septuagenarians.
People in their 70s or 80s.
That's the way they speak about the career, in my interpretation, it sounds more like they're in service.
Yeah.
You know, the audience wants this. I have to do this versus people that have come up in the 90s and later where it has that kind of ring or like core belief of being self-centered or for me. I'm making this art for myself.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that without judgment on either way. It's just a real thing that I've noticed, you know, people that had a peak in the late 60s or in the early 70s or something like that, where they really solidified their career trajectory then. It's a way different outlook on things.
I do think that in the 90s, but there's a couple of names that I would love to drag through the mud as I make this observation, but I won't. There was a moment when that belief that everybody paid whatever amount of money to get into this room tonight, and they all better shut up because I'm going to read this page out of my diary, and I'm so important. I don't have to earn their attention. I don't have to entertain them. They're here because they know I'm brilliant, and they're going to, whatever. It's that whole, oh my God, the sort of the narcissism that got rewarded at times throughout the history of art. But certainly I feel like in the 90s is really gross. And some of it did result in great music. You can't argue that some of those musicians that acted like that weren't really talented. I like Oasis. Those guys are assholes, you know? And certainly some people that I came up with. And I watched them succeed, not only despite acting like that, but a lot of times I felt like because they acted like that.
Because of it, yeah.
And it grossed me out. And I really thought, is this what I should be doing? And then I thought, no, because if I had to do that, I would just find another job. I think we have to be careful. I think it's our job to entertain. I think we do what we do in the service of the audience. I don't think it behooves us or does us any favors to try and predict what the audience might want and try and calculate what's going to make them click, buy, whatever. Calculation is the killer of art. But I do believe that if we see ourselves as being, like you said, in the service of the audience, I think that that's a really beautiful place to be.
The whole like, is this selfish? Am I a narcissist idea because I like to share my thoughts and feelings and creations. I've thought about this a lot. And ultimately, the way that I feel more comfortable doing this is by really focusing on the fact that for me, sharing songs, I don't really feel like I'm an entertainer. For me, I shifted into feeling like I'm a storyteller that shares through my songs or writing as an invitation for connection and vulnerability, because I receive so much from people who listen to me or read my work in return. And to me, that's what I love most in this life. Not getting applauded, that feels nice, but I really like oh man, I really loved your story and it made me feel this way because this happened in my life. I feel like we have to individually come to terms with what our singular sense of purpose and the thing that makes us feel good in this path. So have you had a similar, because you said your girlfriend who would use that as kind of a
sorry,
insult. How did you grapple with that at all for yourself?
Yeah, especially we were on Elektra. There were bands on the label that were making so much money, Third Eye Blind, for instance, or whatever. I always use them as an example because they weren't terribly nice and they weren't good. So I don't feel bad throwing them under the bus, is I guess my point. Mm-hmm. But I remember thinking, what am I doing? If I'm not out here, making mad Skrilla, what is the point? And I just kind of kept coming back to, when I was young, I was really freaked out about what's the meaning of life? What are we doing here? I mean, are we just killing time until we die? Because that's what hit me when I was young. And I had a pretty significant suicide attempt and I had a lot of depression. And when I came through it, the thing that got me out of it was there is meaning in life. And for me, the meaning in life centered around music and writing songs and sharing songs and finding a community of musicians and then a larger community of music lovers who appreciated what we did. I just remember that in no small part, music was the main thing that saved my life. I've got people in my life that say, oh, you deserve so much more. You deserve to win a Grammy. You deserve to make $1 million. That verb to me is so fraught.
Same. I hate the word deserve.
It's so gross because inevitably, when you use it in a way to list off the things that you're not getting, ignoring the things that you are getting. I'm sitting in a room full of beautiful guitars. I've got a sweet dog on a velvet couch. I am in the lap of luxury. I've got family that I love. I have safety. I won't diminish the idea that there are tens of thousands or however many people out there that believe in what I do and listen to my music. Sign up for my Substack. Oh, I left that off the list earlier of jobs. I'm incredibly lucky. Could there be more? Sure. But if I was Elon Musk, in my stupid brain, I'd probably be thinking there could be more.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's always more.
Yeah, it's the carrot on the stick. It's always going to be that far in front of you, no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah, gratitude is something that it used to repel me in a way. It felt like too woo-woo, new agey. I was too sheltered. I was also in a time where, I was very strong believer that vulnerability was weakness and all of that.
Oh.
And as I get older and the more I lean into gratitude, I hear what you guys are saying about the word deserve and the ickiness of it, but it can be helpful in retrospect to give yourself permission to experience the good things, to experience the good that comes, because it's so easy to focus on all of the hardships, all of the things you're not getting, all the things that you're lacking, to look back retrospectively and be like, no, I deserve this tour. I deserve these accolades. I deserve, in that sense, I find it very helpful and very motivating then looking forward and to kind of keep going.
That's such a good point, Michaela. You and I need to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I was like, an insight into our personal life is we've been together 17 years and the last, 7 years, Aaron's had a pretty big shift in his life of his pursuits of expansion and mindfulness. It's really incredible to witness someone else's life, especially starting at such a young age, and how I see in practice his mindsets and his view of the world has dramatically changed. And some days it feels like, yeah, I'm with you on this. And other days it feels like he's dragging me, Michaela.
Yeah.
We all have our own timelines and paths. But to that, I do think the word deserve, I think the way that you and I were kind of thinking of it is this feeling oh, somebody's on TV, like nobody deserves that more than them because they're the hardest working, or like I deserve to get this big tour because I think whatever it is, versus I deserve safety and good experiences and love and all this stuff. I remember talking to someone years ago who was like a yogi, and I said something about like my feeling limited and letting myself want things. And I was like, who am I to think that I should have these things? And I remember she was just like, oh, Michaela, because we all deserve to have them.
Yeah.
That's the difference, I think, in the way of thinking about that word.
Yeah, it's like a very knife's edge if you're hiking and there's a cliff on either side. You know, if we're all kind of striving for, I guess, in a way that like humble gratitude and be like, no, I deserve this. On one side is falling into entitlement. Yeah. It's like, no, I deserve this. I deserve this. I deserve this. And then falling the other way is like, oh, you like me? Oh, okay. Yeah, great. Yeah. Okay. And it's like sheepish, this like really thin bit of trail to kind of navigate.
Well, maybe it's that we should accept that we deserve the things that we have worked hard for, but let go of the idea that we deserve all those things we haven't got. It's funny, my guitar player, Ken, in the old 97s, is the oldest in the band. In fact, he's already in his 60s, which freaks me out. Like, what are you doing to me? That is not cool, bro. He's incredibly self-confident. He's an East Texas boy. And nowadays, because we've gone so far in our band that a lot of times when we do interviews or whatever, they tend to ask about, like, how does your band stay together? Or the history, those historical kind of questions. We've become an artifact. Hopefully still relevant, but also an artifact. He was telling a story that I kind of had never really thought about before. Not long before our band started, I had been like a teen folky child prodigy in the Dallas music scene, where I was 16, 17, 18 years old, opening up for national punk rock bands, touring acts as like a folk singer. He knew me because I was very well known in Dallas at the time as a little teenage kid doing that. And so he had come from East Texas, where he was kind of like a football star or whatever, super self-confident. And so when we started playing together, he was telling this story about being amazed because when we would go into a room, he said that I would go over to him and say like, oh man, I don't know where to stand. I don't know who to talk to. They don't want me here. I feel so insecure. And he'd be like, are you kidding? You're like this famous rock star. What are you doing? So in his mind, he's the coolest person in every room into which he's walked. And he can't believe that I think I don't belong in any of these rooms. And it's a good lesson. Like, I don't know, maybe it's like you say, there's a knife's edge, and the best place to land is in the middle of those two extremes. But yeah, it's taken me a long time to not feel like I don't belong in the room.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's something that I have to consistently work at still. And it's the difference between knowing it in my head and knowing it like in my gut. I can rationalize myself out of a lot of different things. One thing somebody said to me that really, really helped was do not put anybody on a pedestal, including yourself.
Yeah.
And just like focusing on that, like me, who I've always kind of had self-confidence issues and all of that. But I noticed that there was like some subversive ways that I put myself on a pedestal that then made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be in rooms and all of that. And just like understanding like, oh, we're all just kind of standing here on the ground and we're all in this together.
John Hamm had a great quote, the actor, where he talked about his early days in St. Louis coming up in acting and his mindset. And I can't even believe that it was this way. I've tried to instill this in my own kids because I feel like it's too late for me in some ways. But his mindset was, if not me, who?
Yeah.
Why does anybody else deserve it more than me? And I was thinking like, oh my God, I wish I could have had that. How do you get that? And I do feel like looking at my own kids, I feel like that they are carrying that into the world. Like they don't think of themselves as less than. I don't think they think of themselves as greater than, because it's like you were just saying, either one is gross, either one is dangerous. The less than thing is such a trap. And I think musicians tend to fall into it because we're so open, like we're just so open to the world. And the idea of being vulnerable is that these things are going to hit, these arrows will strike you. There's no shield.
I think I'm curious how it's been for you, because I feel like if you are someone who, again, a lot of musicians and creatives and sensitive people might have a mix of this challenge of feeling a sense of belonging. And in my experience and observation of the music industry and community is that's so heightened. It's like high school on steroids, who celebrated changes so quickly and who was like standing on the outside last year is now the homecoming queen this year. And next year they might be out again. And it's like, I've personally felt people significantly change how they talk to me or treat me based on like if I have a record that's buzzy or, And I've wondered how you have worked to reconcile that with yourself of how to sustain a sense of self-worth, even when your career might not be in the place in that exact moment where you want, and that the outside world might not treat you in a way that feels aligned with what you hope.
Boy, it's a daily, I would call it a struggle, but I don't feel like that's the right word. I feel like that's my job more than anything else, is to just stay human and to not get caught in the trap of envy, because I feel like of all the traps, that might be the greatest one. Every Grammy night, I feel like I want to barf. And I hate to say it like that, and it's embarrassing to admit it, honestly, because so many of my friends are there. And I've never sniffed it. It's never been even on the radar. And every time it comes up, the people in my family are saying like, will you take me to the Grammys if you ever go? And I'm thinking like, yeah, sure. I'll also take you to Buckingham Palace if I ever go. And I'll take you to, Valhalla. Sure, I'll take you to all those places. Like, I'm not getting invited there. And I can look at those people that are and just think, why? I don't know. I just feel like every time I get stuck in those, I have to look at my daughter, look at my dog, look at my wife, look at my son, look at my backyard, whatever. Just play my guitar. The things that are real, the things that are controllable, not that the people I just listed are controllable, but the things that are right there in my life, in front of me, those are the real things. And the other things are constructs. We're all going to live for this brief moment, and then we're going to die. And if I can really find a way to fill my days with joy and to not let the trap of envy or, I don't know, self-diminishment, I think is something big for me. But it's every day. And I don't have an answer. The answer is what I come up with that day. Maybe it's, writing a Substack where I talk about grappling with envy, which, by the way, thank you. That's a good idea. Make a note.
Yeah.
Feed the beast.
Yeah. I think the answer to that question of what is going to help me return to stasis has to be variable. Because if it's the same thing every day, that same little shadow voice in your mind is going to be like, oh, it's this thing again. This didn't work last time. It's not going to work this time.
Yeah.
So as you keep changing it, and for me, one thing I've been trying to focus on is like, just follow the path of least resistance. Like the simple question, like, does this light me up? And then just do it. And it could be like, I've taken up running again recently because it feels great, or go and dig in the dirt, or just come sit in here and grab an instrument and just play, or whatever it might be for the day. Like fully just immerse myself in trying to be a 3-year-old with our daughter, like whatever it might be.
First of all, thank you for being honest and admitting that, because I think envy is a really hard thing to admit because there's so much shame in it. And I think it's really helpful to talk about like, yeah, I feel jealous sometimes when I see my friends or someone I don't know have something that I would like to have. A therapist a long time ago told me, because I remember I was like experiencing jealousy for the first time in my life in my early 20s. And I was really struggling with it. And I was like, I'm consumed with this jealousy of, a friend at work and of other singer-songwriters in my sphere or whatever. And I, for whatever reason, didn't feel like I had that emotion as a kid. And my therapist was like, this is a human emotion. This is an emotion that all humans have. So when it comes, sit with it. It's what you do with it. So then choose to let it go. I'm not always good at that. I have different phases in my life where I struggle even more. And especially being in early parenthood, I know because I've seen you comment on stuff I've posted about of feeling like I've been punished for choosing to become a mother as a musician, feeling like I've struggled with feelings of like, man, if only I had waited to get pregnant when I was more successful, then I would have been protected from that. Or considering having a second child, like, am I going to screw my career even more? And I still struggle with that on a daily basis. But I've had this thought recently of, man, I don't want to be a victim to my career aspirations anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like I'm going to sacrifice such a beautiful, expansive experience in life of having a family, because I think that transaction will get me what my ambitions tell me I'd like to experience.
Because there's no guarantee that it will.
Yeah.
And it's funny. So in the early aughts, when my wife was pregnant, she was pregnant with Max, Erica. We were looking around LA, like, where are we going to live in Los Angeles? Because we had a big circle of friends there. There's a lot of professional opportunities for me there. We just, everywhere we looked, nothing felt like home. It all felt like home base for a job. And when we came up to where we live now in the Hudson Valley, it just felt like home. I knew that for me, moving from LA, where I had the Largo crowd and all of the movie people that I knew, like all of these entrees to work. I knew that by moving to the middle of nowhere where nobody knew anything about me and I couldn't even fill up a freaking room within like 100 miles. That's not true. I can in New York City, I can. And that's just within 100 miles. But so I knew that I was going to be giving up a lot of professional opportunities. And then so during those years, the aughts, I had 2 little kids. My bandmates had little kids. And we just made a decision within our band. Our tours are going to be shorter. Our record's going to be a little further apart. We're going to tour less. We're going to work less. It's going to cost us. It was a choice we made, and it was very intentional. And during those years, we watched some of our peers, some of our friends, some of the people that we were peers with that we were not friends with, but we watched these people, have careers that just exploded. And I'm not saying ours would have. Our band name is weird. We've always been too loud or too country or whatever it is we are. But we certainly cost ourselves opportunities by working less, staying home more, living outside of LA, Nashville, Manhattan. Those were choices we made. And so especially during those years when I would feel angry at the lack of success that I might be having, I would look at that person that I was envying or begrudging or whatever, and I would think, would I want to trade lives with them and the love that I am surrounded by? And I would think, no, I would not want to trade lives with them. Would I want to sell that many records? Sure, of course. Would I want to play Carnegie Hall every night? Sure. We make choices that cost ourselves. I remember when my daughter was about to get born, my wife went into labor early, and I had a tour scheduled in Japan, like a short little tour. At the time, I was doing really well in Japan. My first 2 solo records gone over very well in Japan, to the point where I was like getting chased down the street by like throngs of young Japanese girls.
Wow.
Which was such a weird experience. So that one trip to Japan, I had to cancel it last minute. I did not fly to Japan because I knew that if I did, I might miss the birth of my daughter. Japanese culture is such that if you cancel a tour last minute, it's considered an insult. I had a few more trips to Japan, but that was really sort of the beginning of the end of my Japanese career. Would I trade Soleil, who's turned 18 last month and is graduating high school next month? Would I trade Soleil for a career in Japan, even if I was playing it like live at Budokan? No, never in a million years. And these are the choices we make. And whatever, at the end of my life, am I going to be bummed about Budokan, or am I going to be grateful that I've got my daughter there with me, who I love more than anything in the world? Obviously, it's Soleil.
Yeah, I think the friction is even more because we live in a culture that doesn't celebrate those choices. Yeah. We celebrate the big shows and the fame, and the beauty of a family and a life at home is like not easily bragged about on Instagram. One thing that I actually do love about social media these days is there is a growing number of, for lack of a better term, influencers who are very honest about what life really is like with young children. And I think about that stuff all the time of like, if I'm not on tour, I'm like, what do I post online? My life is my family. And some people are like, ew, stop. But I love it.
So I think you handle this well. And I've always debated about this. And I've talked to younger artists, basically like y'all, who have kids, because I made the choice when my kids were little that I would never post them. I would give them the choice once they were of age. I have friends that post their kids all the time. I don't know that there is a right answer, for one thing. And I do think maybe it depends on the level, because like at a certain level, there's just crazies. There's going to be freaking crazies that follow you. I don't know what the right solution is. You've chosen to include your whole family in your posts and stuff and celebrate it. And now that I hear your reasoning behind that, that makes me feel a lot more comfortable with the idea of allowing your kid to be in your feed?
Aaron is much more private than I am. Before Georgia was born, he said, like, I don't want you to be posting her incessantly. I made a private account that has to be approved. That's just for family and friends because I love sharing.
Yeah.
And he knows that. So he's like, but I don't want some random people and,
Well, the backstory is like, we've shown up in like extreme northern Sweden to play a show, and somebody walks up to me and is like, your wedding was beautiful. I'm like, whoa.
So this is something that we go back and forth on a lot. And I will post her name and I post stories about her. I try not to post a lot of photos of her face, and we'll put an emoji on her face or whatever.
Sure.
I don't know how not to, because also my music that I've been writing, everything is informed by her now. It's such a huge life change for me that I'm just like, how would it not? And we don't have family support in town. Like, we don't have a nanny. Like, a lot of times we're doing interviews with her in the sound booth. She's with us constantly.
Well, I think all of this ties back to one, understanding that social media is a marketing tool, period. In our case, for what we do.
Sure.
It can also be a great social connection tool if you were a civilian, quote unquote. You're not somewhere where you're trying to sell some art that you make. And so with that idea of it being a marketing tool, as you mentioned earlier, you realize that your approach to your career and your goal was to create connection and create a space that people can be open and real. And so you do that by being yourself and being in integrity with yourself, which is sharing about your family. I think it would be felt if it was something that was more contrived.
Yeah, and I think it also goes to getting straight with what we feel our purpose and intent is as artists, because I have this conversation with other songwriter friends in conversation with their management or whatever of what you should be posting about and how you post and building your brand. If we're talking about it, I'm like, I have half as many followers as you, so maybe I'm not the one to be giving advice, but I don't know how to build a brand. I only know how to show up as myself. And maybe it would be better for my music career if I didn't use my music Instagram account to share my thoughts on different wars and political policies and everything, but I can't. That's just not who I am, and that's not how I'm going to show up. Other people are much more comfortable with that, and maybe the industry rewards, but like you said, these are choices that we make for ourselves, and we have to be okay with the consequences. It's about being intentionally aligned with what feels comfortable for you.
But it's authentic. I mean, it is authentic and it feels authentic. That's a whole other thing, is the social media question is, we're supposed to be good at writing songs. That's the thing we're supposed to be good at, and maybe performing them or whatever. Creating content and building an account with followers, it's exhausting. I haven't logged into Facebook in years. I can only do Instagram now. And even the Instagram, I can see that the tenterhooks are just so strong. Every time I log into, I've got to announce my new Wheels Off. And then an hour later, I realize that I've gone down this.
Yeah, you're watching some reel of some guy tripping, walking out of his front door, slamming into his truck. And you're like, how did I get here?
And for me, it's the perfect way to cook eggs. I guess I like that because Instagram's just, no, do it like this. And I'm like, oh, really? It's great.
Oh, that's so cool. There was a while where Instagram was incessantly trying to sell me $900 sneakers. And I'm like, how did this come about?
Wait.
Why am I?
Yeah, it's a huge time suck.
Yeah, as painful and tedious and just kind of icky feeling it can be, it does create a lot of opportunity where you can live in nowhere, Montana, and create a music career.
Yeah.
Whereas in the early aughts, without this, you kind of did really have to be in the center where there was a large community.
Everything, there's pros and cons to it, and it's just difficult when it takes so much energy to create your own healthy boundaries around it, because it is literally designed to be addictive.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I feel like if your life or your day is a pie, and it's eating up whatever chunk of your pie, then it's taking away from the songwriting. Or I even wonder, I remember when we started, I used to tell younger artists, the only way to do this is to get in the van. Say you're in Dallas like we were. Drive to St. Louis, play there. Drive to Chicago, play there. Drive to Milwaukee, play there. Drive home. Do this every other weekend. Just go out into the world. Do people do that still as much? Because I feel like...
Yeah, I don't know.
the benefits of that are so profligate or legion or whatever the word is. Like, you get so much out of just those experiences and the world that you see and the people that you meet and the stories that you hear and the life that you live. And if that's being replaced with, oh, well, but I'm getting all these other stories and hearing all these, living this life that's all digital. And
I feel like it's two-sided. Strictly career speaking, I don't know if you need to do that anymore.
yeah,
I don't know if you ever need to leave your house. As a human being, I say, yes, absolutely, go do that, because the experiences that you're going to have, the people that you're going to meet are priceless. I learned a lot and I grew a lot and have a lot of really funny, great stories from all of that.
But it is like increasingly harder to do that now, because it's like I was looking through a bunch of old paperwork I had, and I was like looking at hotel receipts from tours that were like $50. I'm like, can you get a shitty hotel room for $50 anymore? I don't think you can. Like, the cost has increased a lot. So that comes up a lot of like, what is the path anymore? That used to be what I thought. Go on the road and grind it out. And it's taken my like body some recalibration to be like, wait, I haven't done any touring since the pandemic. And Aaron's like, what? You played these major festivals. Yeah. You did 2 weeks with the Wood Brothers. You did 2 weeks with the Milk Carton Kids. He's like, those are all like valuable quality performance experiences. And I'm like, oh, right. I'm just not out for 6 weeks playing some good shows and some shitty bars. And that's still making progress and working. But it's shifting what you think is the thing that you're supposed to do to keep with the changing of the times, but also the changing of your own life. Of, okay, I don't want to do that anymore.
I remember touring with Tori Amos must have been 2001, because it was when Erica was pregnant. And we were doing a tertiary market tour. So she was at the end of a run for an album. So we were playing like Sioux Falls and whatever. Nothing against Sioux Falls. It wasn't like Manhattan, Boston, although we did play Carnegie Hall on that tour. That was pretty cool. But it was like 3 months that we were out. Her band was on one bus and she was on a bus with a nanny and with her daughter. And I thought, well, okay, this is how we're going to do it when we have kids. We'll just have a bus for ourselves with our nanny. And you have to be at a certain level. And also, it has to still be the old business model with a lot of money and deficit tour support. I don't know if y'all ever knew what that was, but the record label would send you out on tour and pay for all the losses, because inevitably you'd lose money on tour. And the record label covers all the losses of the tour because they'll make it up with the CD sales. Can you even imagine a world like that?
We toured in a Subaru with a baby.
Oh, my God.
And honestly, it was so much fun.
It was great.
That's so sweet.
I like to say that I did all the fun parts of touring. I got up early. I drove all day. I made sure we got to load in. I helped load in. And then I went to the hotel.
Yeah.
And put a baby to sleep.
And then put a baby to sleep. And then tried to mix records with a sound machine 10 feet behind me,
Not going to lie, though. That sounds kind of nice. Sorry, y'all talk about this podcast being the other 22 hours, right? And everybody gets that reference is that the time that we do it is the time on stage. Like, that's the reason we're doing it. And I remember Rosanne Cash on my first ever Wheels Off episode talking about how touring is such a grind and it's so hard. And the only good part of it is that 90 minutes, 2 hours on stage. I disagree a little bit, because I do kind of like finding the coffee shop, and I don't mind listening to my audiobook while I'm driving between gigs, or if we're on a bus tour with the band, I really love waking up on the bus or playing a board game with my band members. There's a lot of fun to be had. And sometimes the time on stage, say it's a Monday night, say it's an off market, say it's a bummer of a show, say we get to the third verse of Big Brown Eyes, and I can't remember whether now we're in the solo section or the outro, and I go to sing the third verse again, and I realize, oh my God, I'm singing the third verse for a second time, and my bandmates are all looking at me. There's some times where you're on stage and you're like, oh, this is the worst part of the day. That grind can be pretty rough, but sometimes I really do like the other part of it. I do like those other 22 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And just to add one more thing about that, the tour that Michaela's talking about, 2 weeks in a Subaru, just the three of us, I never knew that stopping for 35 minutes at a playground in the middle of a drive was like a great way to kind of spend your day.
Yeah.
Go figure.
I feel like musicians that succeed and having a long career wind up being pretty good at accepting situations. Okay, this is where we're at now. You show up at a gig and the stage is way too small, or the monitor situation sucks, or whatever it is. And maybe because in my childhood, there was, like a lot of folks, there was some trauma and there was some disappointment. But I feel like I got pretty good at just saying, this is the situation now. Now what do we do from here? And in my family, we have, I point up, I'm down in the basement, so I point at the they're all upstairs. We have a saying in our family, it's what it's. This is what we're dealing with, and now what? And so I love that. Like, we're tired on this drive. This is the rest area. Oh my God, it's really beautiful. Look at the honeysuckle.
Yeah, radical acceptance.
Yes.
We played a show one time where there was like some electrical issues, so the guitar player had to play with his back to the stage the whole show.
His back to the audience.
Or the audience, because if he moved, it would like buzz.
The hum was so bad. He just the sweet spot for either guitar, humbucker or not, was facing directly at me at the drums in the back of the stage, and it was like, sorry, here we go.
Oh, man. Well, I feel like we didn't even like actually talk that much about like what you do in the other 22 hours, but this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us and being so honest about everything.
Well, it's truly been my pleasure. You guys are very sweet. I'm grateful that you're doing this because I feel like the world needs this conversation that you're having. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You rock.
Rhett.
Bye.
See ya. Hey, real quick before we wrap up today's episode, it takes a lot to produce even a small show like ours, so if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider taking a minute to check out our Patreon. There's a lot happening over there, all with the intent of growing our community and offering you more resources to navigate a career based on your art more sustainably. You can learn more at the link in the show notes below. Thanks for being here with us, and we'll catch you next time on the Other 22 Hours podcast.